The underground vault had always been a mystery, whispered about in hushed tones by the few who knew of its existence. Hidden beneath an abandoned research facility on the outskirts of town, it was a relic from a past no one dared to document. There were no official records, no blueprints, and no surviving personnel who could testify to its purpose. Yet, despite its obscurity, the vault was not forgotten. It called to those who sought out the unknown, those who craved the rush of stepping into places where they did not belong. Among the curious was Daniel Hayes, an independent investigator who had spent the past 6 months gathering scraps of information about the facility. The deeper he dug, the more his obsession grew. The government denied its existence, yet old employee logs suggested otherwise. Maps of the area showed only a solid foundation, but eyewitness accounts spoke of a concealed entrance buried beneath layers of debris. It was as if someone had deliberately erased all traces of the vault while ensuring its legend endured. Daniel was not alone in his pursuit. He had convinced 4 others to accompany him. Sarah, an urban explorer with an insatiable appetite for danger. Marcus, a history professor with a penchant for lost places. Olivia, a documentarian eager to capture something the world was never meant to see. And Ethan, a former engineer with experience navigating underground structures. Together, they formed a team bound by curiosity and the reckless need to unearth secrets buried in the dark. Their descent began at dusk. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and climbing gear, they navigated through the remnants of the facility, following the clues Daniel had pieced together. Crumbling hallways led them to a service tunnel, its entrance disguised behind rusted shelving. Beyond it, a flight of stairs spiraled downward, far deeper than any basement should have gone. Dust and mold clung to the air, thick and suffocating, as if the earth itself sought to repel them. At the bottom, they found it, a massive steel door set into the rock, its surface covered in symbols that none of them recognized. The air was unnaturally still, absent of the usual echoes one would expect in an enclosed space. There was no keypad, no handle, no visible mechanism to open it. But as Daniel stepped forward, brushing his fingers against the cold metal, something clicked. A deep, mechanical groan reverberated through the walls, and without warning, the door split apart, revealing a void beyond. The group hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. They had prepared for the possibility of breaking in, but they had not expected the vault to invite them in willingly. It felt wrong, too easy, too deliberate. Yet, driven by the hunger for discovery, they pressed on. The threshold was cold beneath their feet, the walls unervingly smooth, as though carved by something far more precise than human hands. Inside, the architecture defied logic. The passage stretched further than should have been possible, its dimensions subtly shifting the longer they stared. The ceiling arched impossibly high, lined with dim, pulsating lights that provided no real illumination. The floor was neither metal nor stone, but something in between, something that absorbed sound rather than reflecting it. It was as if the vault had been designed to swallow them whole. Sarah ran her fingers along the wall, her breath hitching as the surface pulsed beneath her touch. "It's warm," she whispered. Olivia adjusted her camera, its lens struggling to focus, as though the air itself resisted being recorded. Ethan took out a small device meant to measure electromagnetic fields. The screen flickered violently before shutting down entirely. There was no denying it. The vault was not just a structure. It was something else, something aware. As they ventured deeper, a low hum began to resonate through the corridor, a vibration that settled in their bones rather than their ears. It was neither mechanical nor organic, but something in between, something that suggested the vault was waiting. For what? None of them could say. But as the door behind them slid shut with an ominous finality, one thing became clear. They were no longer just visitors. They were exactly where they were meant to be. The moment the vault door slid shut behind them, an unnatural silence settled over the group. It was not the silence of an empty room, nor the kind one found in the depths of a cave. It was an oppressive absence of sound, as though the air itself refused to carry vibrations. Even their own breathing felt muted, swallowed by the walls before it could fully form. The only proof of their existence was the rapid beat of their own hearts, each one hammering against the walls of their ribs in growing unease. Marcus was the first to react, spinning toward the entrance and running his hands over the smooth metal. "It doesn't have a seam," he murmured, his voice unnaturally dull. "It's just sealed." He turned back to the others, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "There's no handle, no lock, no way to open it from this side." Ethan retrieved a crowbar from his pack, wedging it into the minute gap where the door had previously parted. With a grunt, he heaved his weight against it, but the metal did not bend, nor did it so much as creak. It was as though the door had never been meant to open again once it had closed. A shudder ran through him, a creeping realization worming its way into his thoughts. They had not merely entered the vault. They had been consumed by it. Daniel, ever the leader, forced himself to remain calm. "We expected this," he said, though none of them had truly prepared for such finality. "We knew getting in would be easier than getting out. That's why we brought gear." He gestured toward their supplies, though even he knew that no amount of equipment would pry open a door that had erased its own seams. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing a grin despite the tension tightening around them. "Come on, we didn't come all this way just to panic. We want to know what's down here. Now we do." She gestured toward the corridor stretching before them. "So let's see what this place is hiding." With no better options, they pressed forward. The passage was unlike anything they had seen in their research. It was too clean, too pristine, untouched by the passage of time. No dust, no debris, no signs of decay. The walls were a strange, matte material that neither reflected their flashlights nor absorbed them entirely. It was as if the light itself hesitated to exist here, dimming the moment it touched the surfaces. Olivia lifted her camera, pressing the record button, but the screen glitched violently, distorting the image with jagged lines and bursts of static. She frowned, adjusting the settings, but the interference remained. It was not mechanical failure. Something in the vault was actively rejecting documentation. "It's like it doesn't want to be recorded," she muttered. The deeper they walked, the stronger the sensation of being watched became. There were no cameras, no vents, no cracks in the walls where something could be hiding. And yet, the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. It was not paranoia. It was certainty. The vault was aware of them. Then, without warning, the corridor forked. The left path sloped downward, vanishing into an eerie darkness untouched by their flashlights. The right path remained level, leading toward what looked like the faint outline of a doorway. They hesitated, each one instinctively knowing that this choice mattered more than it should have. Daniel exhaled sharply. "We stick together," he said. "No splitting up." He nodded toward the level path. "We take the right." But even as they moved forward, none of them could shake the feeling that something deep below, was waiting for them to make the wrong choice. The group moved cautiously down the right corridor, their footsteps eerily muffled by the vault's unnatural silence. The walls stretched endlessly on either side, featureless except for the pulsing, almost imperceptible movement beneath their surface. It was as if the structure itself was breathing a slow and deliberate inhalation that pressed against them with invisible weight. No one spoke. No one wanted to acknowledge the growing sensation that they were intruders in something far older and far more sentient than they had imagined. At the end of the corridor stood a door. It was unlike the vault entrance, bearing no symbols, no controls, no visible mechanism for opening. It was simply there, an anomaly in a space that should not have doors at all. Its surface was blacker than the surrounding walls, absorbing the light from their flashlights as though it were swallowing illumination itself. Sarah reached out instinctively, stopping just before her fingers could make contact. The air around the door was thick, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Olivia raised her camera again, hoping to capture something, anything that could explain what they were seeing. But as soon as she framed the shot, the screen filled with static. A low, grating sound pulsed through the device, not from the speakers, but from within, as though something inside the camera was trying to push its way out. With a yelp, she dropped it, the screen flickering violently before going dark. The vault had rejected her attempt to document it. Ethan knelt to examine the camera, but before he could reach it, the door groaned. The sound was deep, resonant, vibrating through the floor beneath them. It was not the mechanical hum of an automated system, nor the creak of metal against metal. It was organic, something shifting, something awakening. The door shuddered, and then, impossibly, it pulled itself open. A rush of cold air spilled from the darkness beyond, thick with a scent that none of them could identify. It was not rot, nor mold, nor anything human. It was ancient, heavy, and wrong, as though the very concept of time had decayed inside the chamber. The doorway revealed nothing but blackness, a void where their flashlights refused to penetrate. The light seemed to be absorbed, devoured, leaving only an empty, yawning space that called to them with an almost magnetic pull. Marcus swallowed hard, his academic curiosity warring with a primal instinct screaming at him to turn back. "This shouldn't exist," he murmured, barely louder than a breath. "This architecture, this structure, it's impossible." His voice wavered, as though saying it aloud only made the horror of their situation more real. Daniel, gripping his flashlight like a lifeline, made the decision for them. "We came here for answers," he said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. This is what we were looking for." But even as he stepped toward the threshold, a voice in the back of his mind whispered that he was wrong. This was not what they were looking for. This was what had been waiting for them. One by one, they crossed into the darkness, each step feeling heavier than the last. The moment they were all inside, the door behind them closed, not with the mechanical finality of a sealed chamber, but with the quiet inevitability of something that had been preordained. It did not slam. It did not lock. It simply ceased to be an exit. For a moment, there was only blackness. Then, as their eyes adjusted, the walls around them came alive. Shapes slithered just beyond the edge of perception, their outlines shifting and writhing like ink spilled into water. The floor was no longer solid beneath them. It pulsed, almost imperceptibly, as though the vault itself had begun to breathe in sync with their own panicked inhalations. Sarah reached for Daniel's hand, gripping it tight. "We're not alone in here," she whispered. But the truth was far worse than that. They had never been alone. Darkness pressed against them from all sides, thick and tangible, as if the very air inside the chamber had weight. Their flashlights flickered erratically, the beams struggling against an unseen force, as if something inside the vault resented the intrusion of light. Each breath felt labored, as though the room itself had grown smaller, tightening around them like a throat preparing to swallow. No one spoke at first. They only listened to the sound of their own breathing, to the eerie silence that stretched between heartbeats, and to something else, a noise just beneath the surface of perception. It was not a voice, nor a whisper, but a feeling of movement, like hands brushing against the edges of their minds. Something was aware of them. Daniel took the lead, stepping cautiously into the space ahead. The walls shimmered, pulsing with faint, unreadable symbols that appeared only when he moved. Olivia reached for her notebook, desperate to document them, but when she touched pen to paper, her hand cramped violently, her fingers seizing up as if rejecting the very act of writing. The pain shot up her arm, and she bit back a scream, dropping both the pen and notebook. Marcus knelt beside her, gripping her wrist. "Are you okay?" he asked, but Olivia barely heard him. The pain faded as quickly as it had come, but in its place, something else had settled, a terrible certainty. "It doesn't want us recording anything," she whispered, her voice hollow. "It doesn't want to be remembered." Ethan ran a hand along the wall, tracing one of the symbols with his fingertips. The instant he made contact, a ripple spread across the surface, distorting the symbols into something new. For a brief moment, he saw images, not written language, but memories. Not his own, a city swallowed by the earth, a vault built to contain what remained. People, locked away, their faces blurred and shifting, as though even time refused to remember them. And then, the last image, a door just like the one they had passed through, but on the other side stood something vast, waiting, watching. Ethan stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This place, it remembers. He looked at the others, his eyes wide with something between awe and terror. But it doesn't want to be remembered in return. A deep, resonant sound filled the chamber, vibrating through their bones. The walls trembled, and for the first time, they could see it, see the way the vault was shifting, rearranging itself like a living organism. Pathways that had not existed before stretched into the distance, while others sealed themselves off, vanishing without a trace. They were being funneled, guided, moved like pieces on a board. Sarah grabbed Daniel's arm. "We have to go. Now." But where? There were no markers, no sense of direction. Every path looked identical, and yet the air seemed heavier in some directions, lighter in others. It was impossible to tell which route led to safety, if such a thing even existed here. Then, from the far end of the chamber, a sound unlike any other broke the silence. It was neither mechanical nor human, but something older, something hungry. A slow, deliberate exhale, as though something had just woken up and realized it was no longer alone. The vault did not just remember. It had been waiting. The sound was not an echo. It was not the shifting of stone or the groaning of old metal. It was something alive, something breathing just beyond the veil of darkness. It was measured, deliberate, too slow to be human, too knowing to be mindless. For a long, terrible moment, the group stood frozen, trapped between their own fear and the pull of something they could not see. Then the lights failed. It was not a flicker, not a slow dimming, but an instant and absolute extinction. The glow of their flashlights simply ceased to exist, as if the very concept of illumination had been stolen from the air. The blackness swallowed them whole, erasing every point of reference, every shadow, every distinction between the space around them and the space within their own minds. Sarah gasped. Daniel cursed under his breath. Olivia clutched at her notebook, though she knew it would do her no good. Marcus fumbled for his backup flashlight, shaking it violently, but it refused to respond. In the dark, their breathing became the only measure of presence, their own proof that they had not been erased along with the light. Then Ethan screamed. It was not the scream of someone startled. It was raw, primal, an animal caught in the instant of understanding that it was already dead. The sound cut through the void, filled with terror, so complete that it forced the others into motion. Olivia reached for him blindly, but her hands met only empty space. "Ethan!" Marcus shouted, his voice bouncing off unseen walls, but there was no response. Only the fading echoes of a scream that had already ended. Something had taken him. The group stumbled in the dark, reaching for each other, desperately trying to form a chain, a barrier against whatever was hunting them. "Keep moving," Daniel ordered, his voice strained but steady. No one stand still. It was the only thing that made sense. Standing still meant waiting. Waiting meant giving it time to decide who would be next. Then, without warning, the lights returned. It was not a gradual return to visibility. It was a violent correction, like reality snapping back into place. The vault was suddenly illuminated as if nothing had happened, as if the darkness had been nothing more than a blink. Their flashlights worked again, their beams cutting through the space around them. But Ethan was gone. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, no disturbance in the dust on the floor. His footprints simply ended, as though he had never existed at all. Sarah turned in circles, wild-eyed. Where is he? He was right here, but the vault did not answer. The walls were silent once more, the breathing presence now absent, or worse, simply waiting. Marcus clenched his fists. We're leaving. Now. But the vault had already made its choice. The paths that had been open moments ago were now gone, swallowed into the shifting architecture. There was only one way forward, and Ethan was waiting on the other side, or whatever was left of him. The silence after Ethan's disappearance was more suffocating than the darkness had been. It was not an ordinary silence, not the absence of sound, but an intentional void, a waiting, expectant hush, as if the vault itself was listening for their next move. No one spoke for several seconds, afraid that even the sound of their breath might call whatever had taken Ethan back to claim another. Daniel broke the trance first. "We don't split up," he said, his voice tight with control, though his shaking hands betrayed him. "No matter what happens, we stay together." It was a useless command, one that should have gone without saying, but in the wake of Ethan's sudden erasure, the rules of reality no longer seemed to apply. The group pressed forward through the only passage still available to them. The walls pulsed faintly with a dull, reddish glow, like veins beneath ancient flesh. The air was thicker here, carrying the scent of something stale, something untouched for centuries, yet not abandoned. The vault was not dead. It had never been dead. Sarah flinched as her radio crackled to life, the sound sharp and jagged in the oppressive quiet. No one had touched it. The dial hadn't been turned, and yet a voice rasped through the static, barely more than a whisper. "Help!" Everyone stopped. Olivia covered her mouth, her fingers trembling. The voice was unmistakable. "Ethan!" Sarah yanked the radio from her belt, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Ethan? Ethan, where are you? Are you hurt?" The response came too quickly, too cleanly. "I'm here. Come find me." The voice was Ethan's, but the intonation was wrong. Flat. Empty. It lacked urgency, lacked the raw panic he should have been feeling. It was not a plea. It was an invitation. Marcus took a step back. "That's not him," he whispered. The radio crackled again, but this time, the voice that emerged was not Ethan's. It was layered, something old beneath something young, something ancient beneath something human. It was laughter, distorted and wet, as though something long buried had finally found amusement. Then the radio went silent. Sarah shuddered, clutching the useless device to her chest. "He's dead," she choked out. "Or worse." No one argued. There was no point. A sudden gust of air blew through the passageway, impossibly cold, impossibly deep. It did not feel like wind. It felt like breath, like something exhaling in satisfaction. And then the walls began to shift again, rearranging the paths, sealing them into their choice. There was no turning back. The vault had set the path, and whether they liked it or not, they were walking into the heart of whatever had been waiting for them all along. The corridor ahead was longer than it should have been. The vault had already proven its ability to rearrange itself, to twist its pathways into something unnatural. But this was different. This was wrong. No matter how far they walked, the end of the passage never came any closer. The walls, though ancient, carried no dust, no cracks, just smooth, lifeless stone that seemed to absorb even the sound of their footsteps. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow, her fingers trembling. "We've been walking for too long," she muttered. "We should have hit another chamber by now." Daniel glanced at his watch. "It's broken." The second hand twitched erratically, then stopped, then started again, each motion disconnected from time itself. Olivia checked her phone. The screen had gone black. She tapped it, held the power button, but it refused to respond. The vault was stripping away their ties to the world, erasing their ability to measure progress. Then the air changed. It was sudden and violent, a shift so stark that the breath in their lungs turned heavy, thick with the taste of metal. A smell followed, rising from the floor, a deep, coppery scent, raw and pungent. Blood. Marcus lifted his flashlight, and the beam revealed the first sign of something living, or at least something that had once been alive. The walls were no longer smooth. They were textured, rippled with uneven patterns, dark and swollen like old flesh. The surface was wet, glistening under the artificial light. Then the walls moved. It was a slow, pulsing contraction like a throat tried to swallow them whole. Olivia gagged, stepping backward, but there was nowhere to go. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, impossibly far behind. The vault had them locked in place, trapped in a passageway that was no longer stone but something else entirely. A sound drifted through the stale air, a dragging noise, something being pulled along the floor. It was distant, but it was coming closer, The footsteps weren't human. They were uneven, limping, wet. Then Ethan's voice whispered from the dark. "Help me." It was closer now, just around the next bend. Sarah shook her head violently. "That's not Ethan. We know it's not Ethan." But the corridor had no interest in logic. The walls continued their slow, rhythmic pulsing, the smell of blood thickening. The sound of dragging limbs was near enough that they could hear the breath behind it, rasping, broken. Then the lights flickered, just for a second, and in that second they saw him. Ethan stood in the middle of the corridor, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. His arms dangled limply, the skin stretched too tight over his bones. But his eyes were the worst part. They were empty, hollow sockets where something else now resided. The lights flickered again, and Ethan was closer. For a moment, no one moved. The flickering light had played tricks on their eyes before, but this was no illusion. Ethan, or what used to be Ethan, was standing in the corridor, his hollow sockets fixed on them. His skin, once familiar, was now stretched too tightly over his bones, as if something thinner, something wrong, was wearing him like a suit. The air was thick with a scent they couldn't ignore, something beyond blood, beyond decay. It was the stench of something old pretending to be human. The moment stretched, taut, and unbearable as they waited for him to speak. But Ethan didn't move. He just stood there. Then the lights flickered again, and Ethan was closer. Sarah gasped and stumbled backward, colliding with Daniel, who caught her just before she fell. Olivia clenched her jaw, fists shaking, while Marcus gripped his flashlight like a weapon. The seconds dragged as the light steadied again, illuminating Ethan's figure only a few feet away now. Finally, he spoke. "Why did you leave me?" His voice was soft, almost childlike. It was Ethan's voice, but it wasn't him. It was something mimicking him, something trying to be him. Sarah shook her head violently. "You're not him," she whispered. "Ethan is dead." The thing smiled, and the skin on its face cracked. Dark, sluggish liquid oozed from the fractures like something rotting from the inside out. It lifted one trembling arm, pointing a single bony finger at them. "Come back with me," it pleaded. No one answered. No one moved. Then it lunged. The group turned as one, sprinting down the corridor, no longer caring that it stretched impossibly far. Behind them, Ethan's broken form dragged itself forward, its limbs twisting unnaturally, bones snapping with every step. It was fast, far too fast for something that moved like it was falling apart. The sound of it scuttling after them, half crawling, half lurching, echoed through the passageway like dry leaves skittering over stone. They didn't dare look back. They couldn't. Up ahead, the corridor finally changed. A doorway loomed in the distance, a massive, circular vault door, partially open. A chance, a way out. Daniel reached it first, slamming his shoulder against the cold metal. The others followed, forcing their way through the narrow gap. As Sarah squeezed through, she risked a single glance back. Ethan, or whatever had replaced him, had stopped. It stood motionless just outside the doorway, its head twitching, its sockets locked onto hers. Then it grinned, and the door slammed shut on its own. The vault door slammed shut with a force that rattled the air, cutting off the sound of Ethan's broken movements. Silence swallowed the group, leaving only the sound of their ragged breaths. For a moment, none of them spoke. The sheer relief of escaping that thing, whatever it was overwhelming. But then, as the reality of their new surroundings set in, the relief curdled into something far worse. They were no longer in a corridor. The room around them was impossibly vast, stretching farther than the limits of their flashlights could reveal. The walls were smooth and seamless, a dull metallic gray, but the ceiling was what unsettled them the most. It was wrong. There was no solid surface above, just a yawning black void that seemed to swallow light itself. Looking up too long made their stomachs churn, as though they were standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into something infinite. Marcus was the first to break the silence. "Where are we?" His voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might wake something up. Sarah shined her flashlight around, trying to make sense of the space. "This doesn't make sense." The vault, isn't supposed to be this big. Nothing about this place is supposed to be anything, Olivia muttered. She pulled out her phone, knowing full well it was useless. The screen remained black, its battery dead despite being full when they had entered the vault. Daniel tried his watch again. The hands twitched, but time refused to move forward. Then, as if on cue, the room responded. The lights on their flashlights flickered, not in the erratic way they had before, but together, in sync like something was controlling them. A slow, rhythmic pulse, off and on, then off again. And in the darkness between each flicker, the room changed. The smooth metallic walls now bore markings, deep, jagged carvings that hadn't been there before. Symbols, twisted shapes, etched as though by desperate hands. The floor, once solid and featureless, was now covered in shadows that shouldn't have been there. They twisted unnaturally, flickering against the floor even when there was no light to cast them. Sarah took a step back. We need to find a way out of here. Now, Daniel moved toward one of the carvings on the wall, tracing his fingers over the rough, uneven surface. The symbols weren't random. They felt deliberate, methodical. These look ancient, he murmured. Like warnings. Olivia swallowed. Warnings for what? As if in answer, the void above them shifted. It was subtle at first, a trick of the eye, until they realized it wasn't. The blackness wasn't just empty space. It was something else. Something living. Something moving. The ceiling wasn't a ceiling at all. It was watching them. As the realization washed over them, a palpable tension gripped the group. The shadows pooled around their feet, darkening as they instinctively huddled closer together. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. It was as if the void above was more than just an absence of light. It was a presence, a consciousness that hung over them, contemplating their every move. The air felt heavier, charged with a silent anticipation. What is that? Marcus stammered, his eyes wide as he scanned the blackness. It can't just be nothing. Maybe it's the source of this place, Olivia suggested, her voice trembling. Maybe it's controlling the vault, shaping it into whatever this is. Daniel stepped back, eyeing the ceiling warily. We can't just stand here. We need to move, to find another exit or... Before he could finish, a low, resonant hum filled the room. It started faintly, like the distant murmur of an unseen crowd, and gradually grew louder. The walls vibrated with the sound, the markings seeming to shimmer in response. It felt like an ancient language, one that echoed through time, laden with warnings and threats. The hum coiled around them, wrapping tightly, making it hard to think. We need to get out, Sarah shouted, her voice slicing through the oppressive atmosphere. She turned and bolted toward the far wall, searching for any sign of an exit. As she ran, the shadows seemed to ripple, darting toward her in a way that felt almost alive. Daniel called after her, but his voice was drowned out by the increasing volume of the hum. It was as if the room itself had awakened, reacting to their panic. Olivia, feeling the vibrations in her bones, hesitated but then followed Sarah, her heart racing. Marcus, torn between staying with Daniel and following the others, ultimately joined the chase, compelled by a primal instinct to survive. The markings on the walls grew denser as they neared the far side of the room. The shadows writhed, twisting around their legs, almost as if they were trying to pull them down into the floor. It was disorienting. Every step felt heavier, like running through water. Finally, they reached a point where the wall wasn't solid. It rippled like a surface disturbed by wind, an illusion of reality bending before them. The hum crescendoed, echoing within the confines of their skulls, as if urging them to go further. "Get through," Sarah shouted, lunging forward. The others followed, and as they pushed against the vibrating surface, it gave way, engulfing them in a rush of blackness. They tumbled through, landing hard on a cold, uneven surface. As they looked around, the room they had entered was dimly lit by an unnatural glow emanating from the walls, revealing more of the strange markings that now pulsed rhythmically, echoing the hum they had just escaped. But they weren't alone. Figures stood against the walls, shadowy and indistinct, watching. Their faces were obscured, but but their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, reflecting the pulse of the markings. The watchers were silent, their presence palpable as they leaned in, drawn to the newcomers. "Who are they?" Marcus whispered, fear lacing his voice. "I don't think we're meant to be here," Daniel replied, backing away slowly. The figures advanced slightly, the glow of their eyes intensifying. And then, without warning, one stepped forward, breaking the line. A voice echoed, deep and resonant, shaking the very foundation of their sanity. "You shouldn't have come." The words hung in the air, a heavy weight that settled over the group like a shroud. The voice was deep, resonant, and seemingly omnipresent, vibrating through their very beings. The figure that stepped forward was cloaked in shadows, its features indistinguishable. It exuded an aura of authority and dread. The glowing eyes that watched them flickered with an unsettling blend of curiosity and contempt. "Why are you here?" the figure continued, its voice echoing as though it emanated from every corner of the room. "You have intruded upon sacred ground, a realm that exists beyond your understanding." Ethan's form was a distant memory now, overshadowed by the stark reality of their predicament. In the face of this entity, the fear that had gripped them transformed into something more profound. Regret. Regret for the choices that led them here, for the curiosity that had compelled them to venture into the unknown. Olivia took a hesitant step forward, compelled by a strange mix of fear and determination. We were trying to find Ethan. We thought we could help him." Her voice trembled, but held a flicker of defiance. The figure's glowing eyes narrowed, and a low rumble of laughter resonated in the air. "Help? You seek to help that which has long since been lost? Ethan is gone, consumed by forces beyond this world." The shadows around the figure flickered, revealing brief glimpses of grotesque, writhing shapes, an unsettling reminder of the darkness that lurked in the corners of their minds. Daniel felt his stomach churn as the reality of their situation began to sink in. "What are you? What happened to him?" he demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "You ask questions to which you will find no answers," the figure replied, its voice echoing with a hollow sadness. "You tread upon ground marked by suffering and despair. This vault is a sanctuary for lost souls, and it bears witness to their anguish. Your friend has become a part of that anguish." As the figure spoke, images flashed before Daniel's eyes. Visions of Ethan, laughing and alive, then morphing into the broken thing they had encountered in the corridor. The laughter faded, replaced by an eerie silence, the shadows wrapping around Ethan like a shroud, pulling him away from the light. Sarah stepped back, her heart racing. "What do you want from us?" she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "We didn't mean to intrude. We just wanted to save him." "Save him?" The figure tilted its head, the shadows swirling around it like a tempest. "You seek to save what has already been claimed. You do not understand the depths of your own ignorance. You, too, may find yourselves entwined in this darkness." Marcus felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. "What happens if we stay? If we don't leave?" The figure leaned closer, its presence suffocating. "To remain here is to embrace the inevitable. You will become part of the echoes that haunt this place. Lost souls forever, searching for what they can never reclaim." A wave of realization washed over the group. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. They were in danger of losing themselves to this dark void. The entity's words resonated with an ominous finality, each syllable a reminder of the stakes. As the shadows around them deepened, Daniel's resolve hardened. "We have to find a way out," he declared, scanning the room for any signs of escape. "We can't become part of this nightmare." The figure's laughter echoed once more, an unsettling sound that vibrated through the air. "Escape is an illusion, dear children. The vault is not just a prison. It is a reflection of your own despair. You will find no solace here." But as they exchanged glances, a shared determination flickered within them. They might be ensnared in darkness, but they would not surrender without a fight. The search for Ethan was only the beginning. Now they had to fight not just for him, but for their very souls. The atmosphere thickened with uncertainty, the very air vibrating with the echoes of the figure's ominous words. The group's determination, though strong, was intertwined with dread, a palpable fear that threatened to suffocate them. They stood in the presence of something ancient and powerful, and the realization that escape might be futile weighed heavily on their hearts. However, one truth burned brightly in their minds. They had to act, to confront whatever lay ahead. Daniel took a step back, pushing against the cold stone wall behind him, seeking some form of grounding amidst the chaos. "We need to regroup and think this through," he urged. "There has to be a way to reverse what's happening." He turned to the others, searching their faces for solidarity. "We can't let this place consume us." Olivia nodded, her brow furrowed in determination. "We need to find something, some kind of clue that can help us understand what happened to Ethan. Maybe there's something in the vault that can explain all of this." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the pulsating markings and the ominous figures lurking in the shadows. As they began to explore their surroundings, a sudden shift in the atmosphere caught their attention. The watchers, once passive, stirred, their forms becoming less indistinct. The glow in their eyes intensified, illuminating the markings on the walls with an eerie light. It was as if the vault itself was awakening, responding to the group's growing agitation. "What is happening?" Marcus whispered, a shiver running down his spine. The energy in the room shifted, and the shadows began to ripple in response to the group's movements. It felt as though the vault was alive, an entity with its own will, and it was reacting to their fear and determination. "Look!" Sarah exclaimed, pointing to the far wall. Amidst the glowing symbols, a new image began to form, a series of scenes that flickered like a film reel. At first, it was a blurred vision, but gradually it sharpened, revealing the outlines of familiar figures. It was Ethan, surrounded by the other members of their group, laughing and enjoying life before the darkness swallowed him whole. "This is..." Daniel's voice trailed off, his heart racing as he recognized the moment when they had last seen Ethan. The scene played on, morphing into images of his gradual decline, his isolation, his despair, and the moments leading to his fateful descent into the vault. "We have to keep watching," he urged, unable to tear his gaze away from the unfolding tragedy. As the visions continued, the group felt a collective sense of sorrow wash over them. Each frame showcased their friend slipping further away, consumed by darkness. It was a haunting reminder of their own negligence, a painful echo of regrets they had long buried. They had assumed Ethan's struggles were mere phases. They had never realized the extent of his despair until it was too late. Just as the final image appeared, Ethan standing at the precipice of the vault, ready to surrender, the entire room quaked violently. The watchers recoiled, their forms twisting in agitation. The pulsating glow of the markings intensified, sending waves of energy that reverberated through the air. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the group struggled to maintain their balance. "What's happening?" Olivia cried, fear creeping into her voice. "The vault is reacting," Marcus shouted, trying to make himself heard over the cacophony. "We need to find a way to calm it down." With renewed urgency, they searched for anything that could help them gain control over the chaotic energy surrounding them. But in that moment of panic, the central figure, the one that had first spoken to them, stepped forward once more. "You cannot change what has been done," it warned, its voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Ethan's fate is intertwined with the darkness of this vault. To release him, you must confront your own shadows." As the echoes of its words faded, the images around them transformed again, morphing into nightmarish reflections of their own fears and regrets. Each member of the group saw their darkest moments come to life before their eyes. Failures, betrayals, and unspoken truths. They were confronted not only with the loss of Ethan, but with the painful weight of their shared past, each memory laced with guilt and sorrow. In that moment, a shattering realization struck Daniel. They weren't just here to save Ethan. They had to face their own demons, to confront the very shadows that had led them to this place. Only by confronting their own darkness could they hope to bring light back to Ethan's world, and perhaps find a path toward their own redemption. Determined, they rallied together, each one drawing strength from the collective pain they had endured. "We can do this," Daniel declared, his voice steady. "We'll face our fears and break the hold this vault has over us. For Ethan and for ourselves." With that resolve, they prepared to confront the darkness that surrounded them, ready to face the echoes of their past in a bid for redemption and freedom. With a newfound sense of purpose, the group stood united in the heart of the vault, their hearts racing as they prepared to face the very darkness that had ensnared them. The eerie glow of the markings pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeat, an ominous reminder of the stakes at play. Each member of the group felt a weight pressing upon them, a palpable tension that grew with the realization that this was not just about Ethan. It was a battle against their own shadows. Daniel stepped forward, taking a deep breath as he attempted to steady his racing heart. "We need to acknowledge our fears," he said, his voice carrying a sense of urgency. "We have to be honest about what brought us here. Only then can we begin to break free." He glanced at each of his friends, willing them to join him in this cathartic confrontation. Olivia was the first to step beside him, her eyes glistening with tears. "I've always been the one who tries to hold everything together," she confessed. "But I failed Ethan when he needed me most. I was too caught up in my own life, too wrapped up in my own fears to see what he was going through." Her voice trembled, the vulnerability of her admission hanging in the air like a heavy mist. Marcus followed suit, his expression shifting from fear to determination. "I was so focused on my own problems that I ignored his cries for help," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I let my ambition blind me, and in doing so, I lost a friend. I can't change the past, but I can face the truth now." As the others began to voice their own regrets, Daniel felt a surge of energy in the room. Each confession was like a thread unraveling, pulling the group closer together while simultaneously drawing back the veil of darkness that had engulfed them. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes wide with realization. "I used to think that being there for someone meant fixing their problems for them," she said. "But I never realized that sometimes all they need is someone to listen. I let my arrogance come between us." The vault seemed to react to their words, the shadows swirling more violently as each confession pierced through the thick fog of despair. Daniel could feel the tension in the air shift, the weight of their collective regrets beginning to lift, even if just slightly. It was as though the vault was listening, acknowledging their pain, and allowing room for healing. As the group continued to share their stories, a profound sense of camaraderie emerged. The vulnerability they exhibited only served to strengthen their resolve, transforming their fear into a powerful force. Daniel felt his own heart swell as he looked at his friends, united in their purpose. "We have to do this for Ethan," he reiterated. "He deserves to be freed from this darkness, just as we deserve to find our way back to the light." Just as the atmosphere began to shift towards hope, the central figure manifested before them once more, its presence both threatening and captivating. "You think that acknowledging your fears will grant you freedom?" it asked, its voice a low growl. "This vault does not relinquish its hold easily. To escape, you must confront the very essence of your darkness." Daniel stepped forward undeterred. "We're ready. We've faced our fears and acknowledged our mistakes. We will not let this place take us." The figure's eyes blazed brighter, and the shadows around it thickened, morphing into grotesque forms that seemed to claw at the walls of the vault. "Very well," it hissed. "Let's see if you truly have the strength to break free. You will confront your darkness in a trial of despair, and only those who survive will find redemption." In an instant, the environment shifted. The vault morphed into a swirling vortex of darkness, each member of the group being pulled in different directions as their shadows manifested before them. Daniel felt himself being dragged into a suffocating void, the shadows clawing at his mind, whispering his insecurities and failures in a cacophony of despair. Suddenly, he found himself standing alone in a dimly lit room that mirrored his childhood home. The familiar sounds of his family filled the air, but there was a palpable tension, an undercurrent of discontent. He saw his younger self, sitting at the dining table, while the adults around him engaged in heated arguments. The images flickered, revealing moments of feeling unheard, overshadowed by the weight of expectations and criticism. "Remember this?" A voice taunted from the shadows. "You were never enough." The words echoed in his mind, and the pain of that childhood inadequacy surged back to the forefront of his thoughts. Yet, Daniel stood firm. He had grown since then. He understood that those voices were echoes of the past, not reflections of his worth. With a fierce determination, he shouted back at the darkness, "I am not defined by my past. I am more than your whispers." The shadows recoiled, momentarily retreating, granting him a glimpse of the light he sought. As he fought against the shadows, Daniel knew that his friends were facing their own trials, battling their own demons. This confrontation was not just about freeing Ethan. It was a quest for self-acceptance and redemption. With each act of defiance against the darkness, they would inch closer to the truth and the freedom they desperately sought. The chaotic vortex of darkness pulsated around Daniel as he emerged from his trial, feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. The last vestiges of shadow retreated, but the memory of his childhood insecurities lingered like a bitter aftertaste. The experience had been a significant step toward liberation, yet he was acutely aware that he was not done fighting. As the shadows began to coalesce again, he found himself yearning to reunite with his friends and support them in their battles. Just as he gathered his thoughts, he felt the ground tremble beneath him, and a shattering sound echoed through the darkness. It was as if the very walls of the vault were breaking apart, revealing glimpses of his friends undergoing their own confrontations. Daniel knew he had to reach them, to help them face their fears and navigate the abyss of despair. He steadied himself, focusing on the bond they had forged, which was now more crucial than ever. Across the swirling maelstrom, he caught sight of Sarah, her figure illuminated by flickering light as she wrestled with her shadows. They took the form of her past mistakes and regrets, each one a haunting reminder of the moments she had failed to be there for Ethan. The darkness danced around her, taunting her with echoes of doubt. "You abandoned him when he needed you the most," it hissed. "You were too caught up in your own world to save him." But Sarah was not the timid girl from before. She was stronger now. With tears streaming down her face, she confronted the shadows head-on. "You don't get to define me," she cried, her voice resonating with newfound strength. "I was wrong, yes, but I will make it right. I will not let your whispers drown out my resolve." Her determination shone through the darkness, illuminating her path as she began to break free from the weight of her guilt. Daniel watched in awe as Sarah's defiance sent ripples through the shadowy landscape. The more she embraced her imperfections, the more the shadows faltered. Each time she acknowledged her pain and chose to rise above it, the darkness receded, making way for light. It was a powerful reminder that acceptance of one's flaws could illuminate even the darkest corners of the mind. Further along, he glimpsed Marcus grappling with his own reflections. The shadows swirling around him formed a mosaic of missed opportunities and unfulfilled dreams. Each whisper was a reminder of his ambition and the way it had isolated him from those he loved. "You were never there for him, were you?" the shadows taunted, casting his every regret into sharp relief. In that moment, Marcus felt the weight of his choices bearing down on him. However, he soon found the courage to speak against the darkness. "I thought ambition would fill the void, but it only created more distance. I see that now," he said, his voice steady. "I'm done hiding behind my dreams. I'll honor Ethan's memory by being present for those who matter." The shadows hissed in response, but Marcus stood tall, his resolve firm. With every confession, he chipped away at the darkness, revealing the brilliant core of his being, a core strengthened by vulnerability and growth. Daniel felt the energy shift in the air as their individual battles intertwined, forming a tapestry of hope and resilience. Suddenly, A shattering noise echoed through the void, reverberating like thunder. Daniel's heart raced as he recognized the sound of glass breaking. He looked around, his breath hitching at the sight of Olivia standing amidst a swirling vortex of shards that had formed from the remnants of her past. Each shard reflected moments of self-doubt and insecurity, trapping her in a cycle of guilt and shame. "No, please," Olivia cried, her voice breaking. "I can't face this." But the shards pressed closer, threatening to consume her. Daniel felt a surge of urgency, knowing he had to help her break free. "Olivia," he shouted, pushing through the shadows. "You are stronger than you think. Embrace your past, and it will lose its power over you." The moment his words reached her, Olivia paused, her breath shaky as she turned toward the shards. "I've let my past define me for too long," she whispered, gathering her courage. "But no more. I refuse to be a prisoner of my regrets." As she spoke, the shards began to shimmer and dissolve into light, scattering like fallen leaves. Daniel felt a surge of pride for his friend, knowing that each of them was growing stronger through their individual confrontations. The power of their connections, bonded by pain, guilt, and love, was breaking the hold of the darkness. The vault shook violently, and Daniel sensed that the culmination of their experiences was coming to a head. As he turned, he saw shadows coalescing into a central figure, more powerful than before. It loomed larger, its presence demanding and suffocating. "You think you can conquer your darkness?" It sneered, its voice dripping with malice. "You are all merely shadows of your true selves, and I am here to remind you of that." But Daniel, fueled by the courage and growth they had all shown, stood firm. "You are nothing but a reflection of our fears," he proclaimed. "We will not let you control us anymore." As he spoke those words, the bonds of their friendship surged forth, illuminating the vault with an intense light. The figure recoiled, and Daniel knew that this confrontation would not end here. They had taken a crucial step toward freedom, but the battle was far from over. Together, they would face whatever darkness lay ahead, knowing that their connection would guide them through. The air in the underground vault crackled with anticipation as the group regrouped, the flickering light from their collective strength illuminating the darkness. The shadows had retreated momentarily, but the looming threat of the malevolent figure remained palpable. Daniel, Sarah, Marcus, and Olivia exchanged glances, each feeling the weight of the confrontation ahead. The powerful being that had emerged from the depths of their fears was a manifestation of their most profound insecurities, and they knew they had to stand united to face it. Daniel took a moment to assess the expressions on his friends' faces. There was fear, but more importantly, there was a spark of determination. Each of them had confronted their personal demons, and the resolve in their eyes signaled a transformation that could not be undone. "We've come too far to turn back now," he said, his voice steady. "We're stronger together, and we can't let this darkness define us any longer." As they formed a circle, the shadows around them began to pulse ominously, sensing the unity that radiated from their bond. The air thickened with tension as the figure coalesced into a more defined shape, its features dark and menacing. It loomed closer, its voice a chilling whisper that slithered through the air. "You think you can defeat me? I am the embodiment of your fears, the echo of your regrets. You cannot escape me." Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice unwavering. "You're a part of us, yes, but you do not control us. We acknowledge our fears and mistakes, but we refuse to let them dictate our lives." As she spoke, a bright light flared around her, fueled by her newfound conviction. Marcus joined her, his voice rising in defiance. "You thrive on our weaknesses, but we have learned to embrace our vulnerabilities. We are not the same people we were when we entered this vault." His words resonated with the others, and Daniel felt a surge of strength coursing through the group. The figure's laughter echoed through the chamber, an unsettling sound that rattled the very walls of the vault. "Foolish mortals, your connections are meaningless against the darkness. I will consume you one by one until there is nothing left." The shadows swirled around them, dark tendrils reaching out to ensnare them. In a moment of clarity, Olivia closed her eyes, remembering the warmth of her friend's support. She raised her arms, summoning the energy they had shared in their struggles. "We are not alone in this fight. We carry the memories of those we have lost, and their strength fuels us. Together, we can overcome any darkness." Her voice rang out, echoing with a power that startled even the shadows. As if responding to her declaration, the vault shuddered, and a surge of light broke through the oppressive darkness. It was a blinding radiance that enveloped them, pushing back against the encroaching shadows. Daniel felt his heart race as he watched the figure contort and writhe in response, its form destabilizing under the weight of their collective resolve. The confrontation reached a fever pitch as the darkness lunged forward, attempting to engulf them. Daniel and his friends stood their ground, channeling their energies into a unified force. "No more!" they shouted in unison, a battle cry that reverberated throughout the vault. The shadows recoiled, as if stung by their determination. With each passing moment, the darkness began to fracture, the once menacing figure shrinking under the onslaught of their light. "This isn't the end," it howled, its voice laced with desperation. "You may banish me today, but I will return. You will never be free of me." As the shadows dissipated, Daniel felt a profound sense of victory wash over him. But there was no time to linger on the triumph. The vault trembled as the remnants of darkness sought refuge, clawing at the edges of their reality. "We have to keep moving," he urged, realizing that their battle was not yet complete. Together, they pushed forward, stepping into the next chamber of the vault. The atmosphere shifted, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Flickering lights illuminated the stone walls, revealing eerie murals depicting past horrors and forgotten fears. Each painting seemed to breathe, whispering the stories of those who had come before them. Each tale a warning and a testament to resilience. As they ventured deeper, Daniel felt the gravity of their task settle upon him. The vault was not merely a prison of shadows. It was a labyrinth of their collective struggles. They were not just fighting an external darkness. They were navigating the intricate web of their own psyches. Each chamber would reveal another layer of their fears and regrets, but together, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. With determination burning in their hearts, they pressed on, knowing that the next trial awaited them. It was a gathering storm, a tempest of emotions and shadows that would test their unity and resilience. And as they descended further into the vault, they could sense that the ultimate confrontation was still to come. The deeper Daniel and his friends ventured into the underground vault, the more they felt the weight of history pressing upon them. Each chamber held its own unique atmosphere, thick with memories and echoes of what had transpired long before their arrival. As they stepped into the next room, they were immediately struck by the chilling sight before them. A vast expanse of mirrors lining the walls, each reflecting their images distorted in grotesque ways. This chamber felt different. It thrummed with an unsettling energy, and a sense of foreboding enveloped them. As they cautiously approached the mirrors, the reflections began to shift. Daniel saw not only his own face, but also the faces of the people he had hurt and let down throughout his life. Shadows of his past danced across the glass, conjuring memories he had tried desperately to forget. With each passing moment, the mirrors grew more animated, displaying vivid scenes from his life, moments of triumph overshadowed by deeper regrets. He saw the friend he had betrayed, the family member he had neglected, and the relationships he had failed to nurture. "Do you see it?" Sarah's voice broke through his reverie, tinged with disbelief. She stood before a mirror that reflected a younger version of herself, one that still bore the weight of insecurities. "It's showing us who we used to be, who we can still become if we're not careful." The image flickered, revealing a version of Sarah paralyzed by fear, unable to move forward. It was a stark reminder of how deeply her past had shaped her present. Marcus stepped closer to his own reflection, which warped into an array of self-doubt and anxiety. He winced at the sight of himself cowering in fear, haunted by the moments when he had backed down from challenges. This isn't just about facing our fears, he realized aloud. It's about confronting the consequences of our actions and the choices we've made. The gravity of his words hung in the air, resonating with the others as they turned to examine their own reflections. Olivia stood transfixed, her mirror revealing scenes from her childhood. Happy moments intermingled with the trauma of bullying and isolation. Tears welled in her eyes as she confronted the memories she had buried deep within. We've allowed these moments to define us, but they don't have to, she whispered, feeling the solidarity of her friends surrounding her. The reflections morphed into images of strength and resilience, urging them to reclaim their narratives. As the chamber pulsed with energy, the reflections began to speak, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of despair and longing. You cannot escape us. We will haunt you until the end of time, the echoes proclaimed, a chorus of regret that reverberated throughout the room. The walls seemed to close in, and the mirrors shimmered ominously, threatening to trap them within their confines. Stay focused, Daniel shouted, attempting to break through the disorienting noise. We can't let this darkness consume us. We must confront our past, but we also need to remember who we are now. Drawing on the strength of their shared experiences, he raised his voice above the clamor. We've come too far to allow our past to define our future. At that moment, the mirrors began to crack, fracturing under the weight of their collective resolve. Shards of glass splintered and fell to the ground, each one reflecting the faces of the group with clarity. The reflections transformed, revealing images of strength and unity, showcasing how far they had come and the bonds they had forged. Together, we can break these chains, Daniel urged, his words resonating with newfound energy. The mirrors shattered completely, cascading down like rain, and the noise subsided into an eerie silence. The chamber felt lighter, the oppressive energy dissipating into the air. They had faced the echoes of their past and emerged unscathed, but Daniel knew that the trials they faced were far from over. Each chamber in the vault represented a new challenge, and they had to be prepared for whatever lay ahead. As they regrouped, Olivia looked around, her expression a mixture of relief and determination. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steadier now. The sense of victory over their reflections emboldened them, but they understood that the true battle lay in the challenges that awaited them deeper within the vault. Daniel felt a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. They had triumphed over one obstacle, but the path ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. Together, they stepped forward into the next corridor, determined to face the unknown. As they moved further into the vault, they could feel the atmosphere shift once again, the air thickening with anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, they would confront it together, armed with the lessons learned from the shadows of their past. The vault might hold terrifying secrets, but with each step, they were rewriting their narratives, turning fear into strength and darkness into light. As Daniel and his friends ventured deeper into the vault, they soon encountered a new chamber that felt markedly different from the previous one. The air was thick with tension, and the dim lighting cast long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly along the stone walls. The group paused at the entrance, feeling a profound sense of foreboding. This room appeared to be a labyrinth, a twisting network of walls and corridors designed to confuse and disorient anyone who dared to enter. It felt as if the very architecture of the vault was alive, ready to ensnare them in its grasp. "Do you think this is some kind of test?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The atmosphere was stifling, and the shadows flickered as though they had their own pulse. Daniel nodded, sensing that this labyrinth was not just a physical challenge, but a psychological one, intended to exploit their fears and insecurities. They had to navigate this maze while remaining aware of the darker impulses that might rear their heads along the way. Without any clear direction, The group stepped cautiously into the labyrinth. The walls were cold to the touch, sending shivers down their spines. As they moved deeper into the maze, the layout began to shift. What had once been a straight path suddenly turned into a series of dead ends and tight corners. It felt as if the walls were closing in on them, and the sense of claustrophobia began to mount. "We can't let ourselves panic," Olivia urged, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. "We have to keep moving forward." With each turn they took, the labyrinth seemed to transform, revealing not only physical obstacles but also mirroring their internal struggles. They began to encounter projections of their deepest fears. Daniel found himself face to face with a vision of isolation, watching as shadows of his friends walked away from him, their backs turned, leaving him alone in the dark. He felt a wave of panic rise in his chest, but he fought against it, reminding himself that they were all in this together. In another part of the labyrinth, Sarah confronted her own demons. The shadows began to morph into the faces of those who had belittled her, haunting her with their words. "You're not strong enough," they taunted. "You'll never succeed." But rather than succumb to despair, she closed her eyes and visualized the strength she had drawn from her friends. The faces began to blur and dissolve, replaced by the encouraging smiles of those who believed in her. As they pressed on, the labyrinth continued to test their resolve. Marcus found himself trapped in a corridor filled with flickering images of past failures, times when he had shied away from taking risks and missed opportunities. Each failure seemed to echo in the stillness of the air, amplifying his self-doubt. Just as despair threatened to consume him, he remembered Daniel's words of encouragement from the previous chamber. "I can choose to change," he declared, and with that affirmation, the walls of the labyrinth trembled and shifted, opening up a new path. The friends regrouped at a crossroads within the labyrinth, each having faced their own trials. "We have to stay united," Daniel reminded them, noting the urgency of the situation. "If we split up, we'll lose ourselves in this maze." Their connection had been tested, but now they understood that it was their collective strength that would guide them through. As they deliberated on which path to take, they felt the shadows swirling around them, whispering doubts and fears, trying to sow discord among them. Determined to trust one another, they chose a path that felt illuminated by a faint light. The shadows recoiled slightly, sensing their unity. However, the labyrinth was far from finished with them. As they walked, the air grew colder, and the sounds of distant whispers enveloped them. They began to hear echoes of their own voices, repeating moments of regret and doubt. "You're not good enough," one voice sneered. "You'll never escape," another added. The chorus of negativity threatened to drown them, but they pressed on, determined to silence the doubts within. Just when it seemed like the walls would close in completely, they stumbled upon a large, circular chamber at the heart of the labyrinth. In the center stood a pedestal with a flickering flame, surrounded by strange symbols carved into the stone. The flame illuminated the chamber, casting flickering shadows that danced ominously on the walls. The sight was both eerie and captivating, pulling them closer. "This must be the heart of the labyrinth," Olivia speculated, sensing that it held the key to their escape. As they approached the pedestal, they felt an inexplicable connection to the flame. It was not merely a source of light, but a manifestation of their inner strength, representing their courage, resilience, and willingness to confront their past. The symbols around the pedestal seemed to pulse in rhythm with their hearts, and Daniel realized that they were being called to make a choice, to confront the shadows they had faced individually and come together as a united front. In that moment of clarity, they each placed a hand on the pedestal, allowing their fears and vulnerabilities to intertwine with the flame. It ignited with a blinding light, illuminating the entire chamber and dispelling the shadows that had sought to ensnare them. The labyrinth trembled, and the walls began to dissolve, revealing a pathway that led toward freedom. Together, they stepped forward, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The experience within the labyrinth had transformed them, teaching them that their pasts, while fraught with pain and regret, did not define their future. They had faced their fears, navigated through shadows, and emerged stronger than ever before. As they left the labyrinth behind, they understood that they were no longer just individuals burdened by their histories. They were a collective force, ready to confront whatever lay ahead in the vault. Emerging from the labyrinth, Daniel and his friends found themselves in a vast underground chamber that felt both familiar and alien. The air was heavy with moisture, and the echoes of their footsteps reverberated through the darkness. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like jagged teeth, and the walls glistened with water droplets, reflecting the remnants of the flickering light they had left behind in the labyrinth. It was as if they had crossed a threshold into a world that existed outside of time, a place where memories and reality converged. As they moved further into the chamber, they began to notice strange markings etched into the stone walls. The symbols were similar to those they had encountered at the pedestal in the labyrinth, but appeared more intricate and haunting. Each symbol seemed to tell a story, whispering secrets of those who had come before them. Daniel paused to examine one particularly elaborate carving, which depicted a figure trapped in chains, surrounded by shadows. It struck a chord within him, echoing the burdens he had carried throughout his life. "Do you think these carvings are warnings?" Olivia asked, her voice tinged with unease. "Or perhaps reminders of those who failed to escape?" The group gathered around the carving, their eyes scanning the intricate details, each person interpreting it through the lens of their own experiences. Daniel felt a sense of foreboding wash over him, recognizing that they were standing on the threshold of a history that was fraught with struggle and despair. Just then, a sudden gust of wind swept through the chamber, carrying with it a chilling whisper. The friends turned, straining to listen. The voice seemed to call out from the darkness, echoing tales of betrayal, loss, and regret. "You think you've escaped," it taunted, "but your past will always find you." The voice reverberated through the chamber, sending shivers down their spines. It felt as though the vault itself was alive, feeding off their fears and insecurities. Determined not to be swayed by the ominous presence, Daniel gathered his friends. "We've faced our fears in the labyrinth, and we can face whatever this is too," he asserted, trying to instill a sense of unity and courage. The group nodded, their resolve bolstered by their previous experiences. They took a collective deep breath and pressed forward into the heart of the chamber. As they ventured deeper, the atmosphere began to shift. The shadows seemed to flicker, and the air grew colder, pressing in on them like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, the chamber split into multiple paths, each one leading to an unknown destination. Daniel felt a familiar sense of dread rising within him, reminiscent of the labyrinth. But this time he was determined not to let fear control him. "We should split up and explore," he suggested, trying to gauge the reactions of his friends. "We might find something that leads us to the exit." Olivia and Marcus exchanged hesitant glances. "Splitting up didn't go well for us before," Olivia cautioned, recalling their previous encounters with darkness. "We need to stay together." Daniel considered her words, but felt a pang of urgency driving him. "We need answers, and time is running out. We can meet back here in 20 minutes. With that, he made up his mind and gestured toward the rightmost path, convinced it was the one that would lead them closer to understanding the chamber's purpose. Reluctantly, the group agreed to his plan, and they split into two pairs, promising to regroup soon. Daniel and Marcus took the right path, while Olivia and Sarah ventured down the left. As Daniel walked alongside Marcus, he could feel the tension in the air. The shadows seemed to shift, following them like specters, each step echoing with uncertainty. As they walked further down their chosen path, the environment began to change dramatically. The walls appeared to close in, and the flickering light from the previous chamber dimmed, leaving them in near darkness. Daniel felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest, but he pushed forward, determined to uncover whatever secrets lay ahead. "What do you think is causing all this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it the vault, or something more?" Daniel considered the question for a moment, aware of the weight of their shared history. "I think this vault is a reflection of our past. the fears we've tried to bury, and the mistakes we've made. It's forcing us to confront those parts of ourselves that we've been running from. Just as he finished speaking, they stumbled upon a small alcove, illuminated by a faint glow emanating from a strange artifact resting on a pedestal. The artifact was a small, ornate mirror framed in twisted metal that seemed to writhe as if alive. The glass shimmered, reflecting distorted images of the friends as they approached. "What do you think it does?" Marcus asked, awestruck. Daniel felt an overwhelming urge to touch the mirror, a sense of inevitability gripping him. As he reached out, the surface rippled like water, and suddenly they were thrust into a vision. In the mirror, they witnessed their pasts unfold before them, memories they had long tried to forget. Daniel saw himself as a child, standing alone in a playground while other kids laughed and played. The echoes of their laughter morphed into taunts, reminding him of the isolation he had felt growing up. He watched helplessly as the vision shifted to moments of self-doubt and regret, each one weighing heavily on his heart. Next to him, Marcus was faced with his own reflections, visions of failed relationships, opportunities he had let slip away, and the crippling fear of never being enough. The mirror forced them to confront the harsh realities they had tried to escape, and the weight of their collective anguish hung heavily in the air. "We need to break this spell," Daniel urged, struggling against the tide of sorrow. "We can't let our past dictate who we are now." As they fought against the pull of the mirror, the shadows around them began to coalesce, forming shapes that echoed their fears. The friends' bond and their shared resolve became the light that began to push back against the darkness. With newfound determination, Daniel shouted, "We are not defined by our past. We have each other." Just as the shadows seemed poised to envelop them, the mirror shattered with a brilliant light, scattering the darkness and releasing them from the grips of their memories. The shards reflected their true selves, revealing their strengths and resilience. In that moment of catharsis, Daniel and Marcus emerged from the vision, breathless but empowered. They knew they had to regroup with Olivia and Sarah, who were undoubtedly facing their own trials in the depths of the vault. As they retraced their steps, they felt a sense of purpose and clarity. The experience had not only strengthened their resolve, but had also deepened their understanding of one another. They were no longer merely individuals navigating a terrifying landscape. They were a team united by their pasts and fortified by their experiences. Each step forward felt like a declaration of their newfound strength, and together they would face whatever lay ahead, ready to confront the ultimate truth hidden within the vault's depths. The echoes of the shattered mirror still reverberated in Daniel's mind as he and Marcus hurried back to the main chamber of the vault. They could feel the weight of their experiences pressing on them, each step feeling heavier as they recalled the past they had just confronted. However, their resolve had been fortified by their confrontation with the shadows of their histories. They knew they had to find Olivia and Sarah before the darkness could reassert its grip on them. As they re-entered the main chamber, the atmosphere felt markedly different. The heavy humidity had turned into a chill that sank into their bones, and the previously flickering lights now glowed ominously, casting eerie shadows across the stone walls. It was as if the vault had taken on a life of its own, shifting and reacting to their presence. Daniel glanced at Marcus, who seemed equally unsettled by the sudden change in the environment. "We have to find them," he said, urgency lacing his voice. "Where could they have gone?" Marcus pondered, scanning the chamber for any sign of their friends. The pathways they had previously traversed now loomed with uncertainty, shadows dancing mockingly as if to tease their growing anxiety. With a resolute nod, Daniel took a deep breath and pointed toward a narrow corridor that seemed to extend infinitely into the darkness. "Let's check that way first. It's as good a place as any." With determination guiding their steps, they ventured into the corridor, which quickly narrowed, forcing them to walk side by side. The walls felt oppressive, closing in on them, and the air grew thick with anticipation. "What do you think happened to them?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think they're okay?" Daniel shook his head, unwilling to entertain the darker possibilities. We can't think like that. We have to believe they're safe. As they proceeded deeper into the corridor, they suddenly heard faint voices drifting through the air. The sound was muffled, almost as if it were being distorted by the very fabric of the vault. Daniel felt a rush of hope surge within him, but it was quickly overshadowed by the ominous sense that something was terribly wrong. "Do you hear that?" he asked, slowing his pace. Marcus nodded, his expression shifting from worry to dread. The voices grew louder as they continued down the corridor, taking on a frantic quality that sent chills down their spines. "We have to hurry," Daniel urged, his heart racing as they quickened their pace. The corridor seemed to twist and turn, leading them through an increasingly disorienting path. Finally, they reached a small chamber where the voices culminated into frantic cries. As they burst into the room, they were met with a shocking sight. Olivia and Sarah stood in the center, surrounded by swirling shadows that flickered like flames, their faces contorted with fear. The shadows seemed to reach out toward them, swirling in chaotic patterns as if trying to pull them into the darkness. Daniel's heart sank at the sight. "No!" he shouted, rushing toward them without thinking. "Stay back!" Olivia yelled, her voice filled with desperation. "It's trying to take us!" Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through him as he instinctively reached for his friends, desperate to pull them away from the encroaching darkness. But the shadows were relentless, their tendrils wrapping around Olivia and Sarah, tugging them toward the void that loomed just beyond. "Focus! We have to confront it together!" Marcus shouted, trying to rally everyone's spirits. "Remember what we faced in the mirror. Our past may be painful, but we can't let it control us." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of their shared experience. "We are stronger together," he cried, reaching out to Olivia and Sarah, who were struggling against the darkness. "You're not alone. We're here." As they joined hands, a surge of energy pulsed between them. The shadows hesitated, flickering as if unsure how to respond to their united front. "We have to face it," Daniel urged, feeling the strength of their bond radiating in that moment. "Let's confront our fears and remind ourselves who we are." In unison, they shouted their individual truths, recalling their strengths and resilience against the encroaching darkness. The shadows writhed and twisted, recoiling from their collective declaration. As each member of the group confronted their pasts and asserted their worth, the shadows began to dissipate, retreating as if weakened by their defiance. The air grew lighter, and the chill that had once enveloped them started to fade. "It's working!" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with newfound hope. Just as victory seemed within reach, the shadows surged forward one last time, coalescing into a singular form, a monstrous figure that towered over them. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a chilling voice resonated through the chamber. "You think you can escape me? You are nothing without your fears." The figure loomed closer, darkness spilling from its form as it reached for them. In that moment of terror, Daniel felt a fierce determination ignite within him. "No, we are not defined by you," he yelled, stepping forward as he gripped his friend's hands tighter. "We choose our own paths." The air crackled with energy as their resolve transformed into a blinding light, illuminating the chamber. The monstrous figure recoiled, its form flickering as the power of their unity pressed against it. With one final surge of strength, they pushed back against the darkness, unleashing the light that had grown within them. The figure shattered like glass, exploding into a shower of darkness that dissipated into nothingness. Silence filled the chamber as the last remnants of the shadows faded away, leaving the friends breathless and trembling. They stood in the aftermath, hearts racing and faces illuminated by the glow of their shared triumph. "We did it," Marcus breathed, a mix of disbelief and joy in his voice. "We faced it together." Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he also recognized that this was only one battle in a much larger war. The vault still held secrets, and they knew they needed to press on. In that moment, They realized they were not just individuals navigating a dark vault. They were a united force, capable of confronting their fears and overcoming the darkness that threatened to consume them. With renewed determination, they made their way back into the depths of the vault, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together they could conquer anything. The vault, once a suffocating labyrinth of shadows and whispers, had transformed into a realm of tentative hope and palpable tension. As Daniel, Marcus, Olivia, and Sarah stood in the wake of their recent confrontation, they understood that their victory was not merely over the darkness that had haunted them, but also a testament to their resilience and unity. The flickering lights that surrounded them now seemed to pulse with energy, as if reflecting the newfound strength that coursed through their veins. Yet, the air was still thick with uncertainty. The vault's structure loomed above them, a grim reminder of the secrets it still held. Daniel felt a tightening in his chest as he realized that although they had vanquished the malevolent figure, the vault was not yet free of its grip. He exchanged glances with his friends, sensing that this moment marked not an end, but a beginning. "We need to keep moving," he urged, his voice steady. "There may be more to uncover." As they ventured further into the heart of the vault, the walls began to change. The oppressive stone gave way to surfaces that shimmered faintly, like polished glass reflecting light in unexpected ways. Sarah, her curiosity piqued, reached out to touch one of the walls. "It's warm," she noted, her voice filled with wonder. "Like it's alive." The others followed suit, their hands brushing against the surface, and in that instant, a wave of warmth enveloped them, filling them with a comforting energy. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, the size of which they could not have anticipated. At its center stood a massive door, intricately carved and adorned with symbols that glowed with a soft, golden light. This was the heart of the vault, a sanctuary amidst the chaos they had faced. "What do you think is behind it?" Marcus asked, or written across his face. "Whatever it is, we need to find out," Daniel replied, stepping forward, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the door. As they approached, the door creaked open slightly, revealing a radiant light that spilled into the chamber. The glow illuminated their faces, casting away the shadows that had plagued them for so long. In that moment, they understood. The light represented their triumph over the darkness, their journey through fear, and the bonds they had forged. "We've come this far together," Olivia said softly. "We can't turn back now." With a collective breath, they stepped through the door, leaving the vault behind. What lay before them was unlike anything they had imagined. A breathtaking landscape of rolling hills bathed in sunlight, vibrant flora stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a world filled with color and life, an oasis of beauty that felt like a dream. "Is this real?" Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "It has to be," Daniel replied, a smile breaking across his face. "We've earned this." As they stood in the embrace of this newfound reality, they took a moment to reflect on their journey. Each of them had faced their own shadows, the memories that haunted them and the fears that held them captive. It was in this new world that they realized those shadows no longer defined them. They were free to create their own destinies. "We can start fresh," Sarah said, her voice filled with hope. "This is a chance to redefine who we are." However, as the group began to explore their surroundings, a sense of foreboding lingered in the back of Daniel's mind. What if this is just another illusion? He pondered aloud, the weight of their past experiences tugging at him. "We need to stay vigilant. Darkness has a way of creeping back in when we least expect it." Olivia nodded, her expression serious. "We can't let our guard down. We fought too hard to reach this point." Just then, a distant sound echoed across the hills, a low rumble that resonated through the air. The friends exchanged wary glances, the light around them flickering as if responding to the impending threat. "What was that?" Marcus asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. "It sounded like thunder," Daniel replied, scanning the horizon. "But it's so clear and bright here." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and from the distance, Dark clouds began to form, swirling ominously as they crept toward the vibrant landscape. The friends felt a chill run through them as they realized the shadows they had fought were not vanquished. They had merely been delayed. "We have to stand together," Daniel shouted, a sense of urgency rising within him. "We faced the darkness before, and we can do it again." With unwavering resolve, they joined hands once more, forming a circle that pulsed with the light they had discovered within themselves. As the dark clouds approached, they felt their energy coalesce, illuminating the space around them with a blinding glow. "We won't let it take us again," Sarah declared, her voice ringing with defiance. As the darkness closed in, they focused on their memories, the moments of triumph that had brought them to this point. The shadows clashed against their light, creating a tempest of chaos and brilliance. But this time, they understood the nature of their fight. It was not just against external forces, but also the remnants of their fears that lingered within. Together, they channeled their collective strength, pushing against the darkness with unwavering determination. The clash culminated in a brilliant flash, illuminating the landscape as the shadows recoiled in a brilliant burst of light. For a fleeting moment, everything went silent, and then the dark clouds dissipated, leaving behind a clear sky. The world around them was vibrant and alive, free from the encroaching threat they had battled against. They had triumphed once more. Breathless and exhilarated, they looked at one another, their bonds stronger than ever. "We did it," Daniel whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their journey. "We faced our fears, and we emerged victorious." As they stood together in the light of their new reality, they understood that they had not just escaped the vault, they had transcended it. They were no longer defined by the shadows of their past, but illuminated by the strength of their shared experiences. With newfound purpose, they stepped forward into the world before them, ready to explore the limitless possibilities that awaited them. They had conquered the darkness within and around them, and now they could forge their own paths in the light. The journey was far from over, but they were no longer afraid. Together, they were unstoppable, and as they ventured into the horizon, they embraced the bright future that lay ahead.